So thanks, guys, for coming to hang out this Friday afternoon. We it's about to get into a conversation on the topic of sexual purity. But before we get into that, maybe as an introduction, just say briefly who you are, and on top of that, when you hear the phrase sexual purity, what crosses your mind? So, Adrian, why not kick us off?
Yeah, so I'm Adrian. I'm work for Renewal, which I've been doing since inception. I'm single, and when I heard the phrase sexual purity, I kind of groaned because I thought, oh gosh, this is a nightmare topic because it's something that I think every single male, Christian male, struggles with, and it's a battle you face from a teenager to your dying day. And just such a call from God for us to live lives that are lives of purity. But it's such a battleground. It's so intense, and the battle's getting harder. Actually, the older I've got, the battle's not got easier. The battle's got harder.
Yeah.
I remember if I was a teenager, pornography was barely a thing. There were magazines on the top shelf of a newsagent, and it very much was a kind of taboo thing. And now, 2 clicks and you're there. It really is so prevalent, and that kind of dopamine hit, which drives so much of our desires, is something that's a real battle to wrestle with.
Yeah, hear you on that.
Yeah.
Jeffro,
Uh-huh.
who are you? What are your thoughts and what crosses your mind when you hear sexual purity?
When I hear sexual purity, or of course, like,
Maybe start by saying who you are.
oh, sir, my name is Jeff, Jeff Katai, and I'm a member of Renewal Church. I'm a believer. I love God. I love creative arts. I love people, etc. So I'm glad to be part of this panel. So when it comes to sexual purity, of course, like the first thought which comes to mind is what the scripture says. Like our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, and it pleases the Father when we are intentional, or I don't know when we use the word strive, but when we create some boundaries to be able to live in his way and his purpose. But the reality in 2024, that's not really easy. Yeah, because even as Adrian was just sharing, like before, even like when it comes to the gates of the eyes, etc. Like right now, pretty much everyone's got like a computer or a smartphone, and even if you are not intentionally purposing, let's say, to go to a porn website, just like the Instagrams, the TikToks, etc. So as you are, scrolling down through the timeline, it's you really have to have the fruit of the spirit to really keep going on. And yeah, so like it's a battle. Sometimes you're like just purpose, but sometimes also you fall into it. You end up like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and yeah, so it's a struggle, it's a challenge. But I know like personally as Jeff, like better is he who is in me than who is in the world. So like even like with that kind of like assurance, just like, oh, tomorrow is another day, kind of like to be strong, and next week, etc. But I think really what works for me is putting some boundaries. Yeah. Putting some boundaries. When it comes to some friends who I just know like always they're up to no good when I'm hanging out with them.
Yeah.
When it comes just like being intentional and be like, I desire to live a life that is really pleasing before God.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that issue of boundaries is the single best thing you can do to win the battle. I was talking with Chikwaza this week, just in preparation for the relationship goals series that's coming up on Sunday evenings, and we're kind of comparing notes from our dating history, and mine's a little longer ago than Chikwaza's, but he just talked about how he put some very firm boundaries in when he was dating Esther, and how those boundaries seem just so conservative, such a long way away from what would be normal culturally. And I think as we struggle with this battle for sexual purity, the thing we can do practically is try and work out what boundaries we should look like. So if we're dating, what is going to be okay and what's not. and have that in mind before the dating begins.
It's true. It's true.
in
And will
term-
you say like the boundaries will vary from an individual to an individual? Okay.
Yeah. So he was saying that he and Esther had agreed that they wouldn't be together alone in his home or her home after 7 o'clock at night, you
Yeah.
know. And that seems such an odd thing to do.
Yeah.
But the boundary is so far away from, you know, falling into decisions that aren't helpful. It actually provides, you know,
It's
some
true.
really helpful ways of providing safeguards and doing things that you later regret.
It's true. That's true.
Yeah. So I'm Imonje. Been married for like 4 years. Have a daughter who's turning 11 months soon. And I think when I first like heard about the topic, I tend to it moves towards the like physical and sex before marriage and what was my life like at the time before I got married, what the temptations I was facing, and I think I noticed was because of the understanding of God I had earlier on, it was fearful. It was like, he's looking at my every action and I have to live a certain way before if I want to get into heaven. And so I think out of fear, in regards to maybe when falling into sexual sin or temptation before marriage, there was fear keeping me away from that. But in my mind, there was a battleground there. Like there were just a fight with thoughts on how do I not keep, my mind on, sexual matters. And when you hear verses like, "Whoever looks at a woman lustfully commits adultery in his heart," you're like, "Whoa, okay." So it's not just me trying to keep myself away from ladies, but to how do I then engage my mind in a way that is acceptable. So I know even as you're talking about boundaries, we've chatted a bit about what that looks like at a physical level. But I don't. What are your thoughts in regards to sexual purity, even in our thoughts? And if so, what boundaries have you effectively been able to put in place to help with that?
Okay. I think like if we go to the area of thoughts, myself, I'll say it comes to identity. Cause like I think I've shared even with both of you, gents. Like before, like I used to identify myself either knowingly or unknowingly as more like as a creative, and to be specific, like as a hip hopper. And you'll find like in genres like hip hop, it's a worldview whereby there are many things are the norm, right? So dating multiple of women is a norm. Like it's actually things that people celebrate upon, partying, etc. And also like being someone who has done. I used to do events quite often before, both before salvation and even after salvation.
Yeah.
And like just like in that era of events, like there are how now as a believer can I be different based on my identity?
Okay.
So like by renewing of my mind, like I'm a kingdom individual first and foremost before whatever the world defines me as, right? So even like when it comes to consuming, even if it's music itself, even like if it's the wordings in the music, because I've come to kind of discover myself, like sometimes like even there's some artists nowadays I'm intentionally avoiding kind of like engaging with their music, because the more I start kind of like really getting into that mind frame, it's like one door leads to another, and now it takes me back to how I used to live before. And you start missing, like I just want to go over here, just hang out a little bit, I just want to call these people, just go like at a place. So like that starts with the mind. Like when I start seeing my mind kind of like really kind of like reflecting back on how Egypt used to be, or like with the music, which takes me back to just like my rebellious nature, how can I really be intentional about either totally shutting it off or avoiding, especially like the songs which I know kind of like just really pretty much just like lead me to either like now start compromising even in the content I start watching.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Okay. Adrian?
For me, I think the start point is just knowing that, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, and God knows my thoughts, He knows my desires, so there's no surprises.
Yeah.
And so when my mind is starting to wander down tracks that aren't good for me or helpful for me,
Yeah.
He knows that. and to continually remind myself that there's grace. So when I've thought wrong thoughts or done wrong things, there's grace there, and I need that continually.
Yeah.
And so without wanting to kind of belittle our failures, it's just critical to understand that there's grace when we do stuff up. In terms of the mind, for me, it's replacement therapy. And what I mean by that is, when you know your mind is starting to deviate, whether it's, impure thoughts or thoughts which aren't helpful for you, you've got to replace those unhelpful thoughts with helpful ones, and when Paul talks in, I think it's Philippians, about, whatever's good, whatever's excellent, anything's praiseworthy, think about these things.
Yeah.
And for me, that's almost a strategy when I see my mind starting to deviate down a path which isn't good. The only way I'm going to beat that battle, taking thoughts captive, is to replace unhelpful thoughts with helpful ones.
Yeah.
So trying as best I can to replace things which are doing me no good mentally with things that are doing me much more good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it takes effort, like
Yeah.
mental effort.
Yeah. And you can see it coming. When your mind's starting to drift down unhelpful routes, and you've just got to catch it at an early stage before it gets momentum.
Yeah.
Because before you know it, your mind is in such a bad place. And you've just got to, catch it quick.
Yeah.
Because the way I used to reason, and it was, if like God created beauty, and beauty is to be appreciated. So I'm like, oh yeah, you see a beautiful sky, you see a beautiful sunset, and it's the purpose is for it to be appreciated. And so then say, okay, so if God created that and created people and human beings beautifully, there's maybe the boundary place of, okay, maybe it looks like it gets to last.
Yeah.
But before that, can you just appreciate someone's beauty and just look at them? And that's a beautiful person.
Yeah.
But then I noticed when I started leaning towards that, and I'd spend, maybe you see someone like, oh, that's a pretty person, and then spend 3, 4, 5 seconds appreciating the beauty. What I then found happening was, as I'm just going about day to day, it's like something has been fed. It's like I find naturally, I look at someone and my thoughts just go further than further than where I wanted them to go.
Yeah.
Almost like something has taken over that thought process. And it's like as I was feeding that bit, it was building up a part of me.
Yeah.
And so even just seeing how the time spent in the things I just engage my mind in has a subconscious effect that may not have seemed apparent initially.
Yeah.
And so just in regards to guarding my mind and the subtle ways in which our thoughts can go down a certain way, initially may not seem very sinful, but just seeing how my body or my heart was starting to tilt, then just helped me recalibrate and be like, okay, my thoughts actually have a lot of power and don't need so much food to end up veering off in a direction I don't want them to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But how do we deal with, because there's this notion sometimes like Christian men are boring, because sometimes also like I try to find like that right balance when it comes to appreciating also, like whereby there are some churches which are too religious. So, like even like with the ladies, like not putting on, let's say, trousers, etc., just totally on the extreme. And then like also like there are some which are too liberal, right? So as a Christian gentleman, how are we able to, even as when you're engaging with sisters, if someone is, let's say, a single, and like you're in the dating scene, etc., how are you able to kind of like show your interest without being of the world in a way? Because I think sometimes like the Christian ladies will be like, you guys are all our meetings are in church, all like how oops, how are we able to really kind of like balance it out right in a way that's healthy and even honoring before God? Yeah.
That is a good question. I think what came to mind first is even just linking it to how to deal with the temptations that come up, I think it's helpful when we see God, see our relationship with God in a way that He's not judging us or seeing us based on our actions, but on who we are in Him. So we are children of God. And so if I'm engaging with Him from that perspective, then I can easily come and talk to Him about my struggles,
Okay.
and not feel like because I'm going through this, because I'm struggling with this temptation, God has done this and wants me to like clean myself up before I can come to Him. So I think what that openness does is, even now in that space of dating and relationships, I can actually ask God questions on how do I, if I've gotten feedback that I'm boring in my approach to women, I found it's easy to then engage with God and say, okay, how do I improve this? Because I believe it's an area he has an interest in.
Okay.
So as opposed to trying to figure it out myself and get direction from
the world
on how do I not become boring, it's okay. So God, how do I best engage in this space?
Okay.
And then also being helpful that even if I get the best advice, that may be boring for one person and exciting for someone else.
It's true.
So yeah, those are my initial thoughts on that. Anything on that, Adrian?
I don't think I can add to that really. I think I'd rather be boring than your actually. So,
there we go.
Perspective.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think something we alluded to earlier, maybe it's not the answer for you guys, but maybe the question I had was, in our current scenario, 2024, this is August, when it comes to sexual purity, what would you say is the most challenging thing that people are facing? Different generations face different things, but with what's happening now and the scenario in the world today, what would you say you've picked up as probably the strongest thing that people are struggling with in this area?
I think within the church, there's such a difference now between what we think as being God's best for us and what culture says is normal. So contemporary culture says, try before you buy, sex before marriage, no problem.
Yeah.
Serial flirting, it's the way to go, just cast your bread on the water, and see if you strike lucky. And everything has become so sexualized. Media is just advertising. It's using our sexual identity and our sexual desires. It's just absolutely prevalent. And so I think the pressure on followers of Jesus to live in a pure way and live counterculturally is probably greater than at any time in history.
Yeah, I see that. Even what Jeff was saying earlier about just on the phone, sometimes you're not looking for it. There are apps where you have ads in between. So you're busy going about your game or whatever, and then, there's an ad, and okay, I was not expecting that.
It finds you,
And on social media, I've had friend requests from ladies, and I know they're not my friends by what they're not wearing, and you just, in that moment, you accept a friend request or not, and one click could take you down some very interesting routes.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
I mean, even just coming on our way here, just noticing how there are billboards advertising massages, and like, I mean, okay, it's a massage, but the photo alongside the billboard,
very suggestive.
You're not seeing the connection between that and the massage. I'm like, okay,
yeah.
So it's everywhere. You might be looking for it, but there's stuff around drawing you into it. I don't know if you have something to add to that, Jeffro.
I mean, yeah, it's true. I think like we're living in a culture whereby there are pretty much no boundaries, and like even right now, like whether people are married, I think like before, like I used to think like when someone is married, most of these things are sorted, and then I did a program I think called Man Enough, whereby like when we were having that panel with married men, single men, I found even the married men are struggling kind of like more with some of these things. So I think like it goes back to that point Adrian said, like of just being intentional and saying like these are my boundaries, whether single or married.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that the enemy, because the enemy I think really it knows our history and knows the places to press. Kind of like, so like just being intentional, hey, over here, like this door, I'll much rather kind of like avoid it. It does really help, you know.
Okay. If there was, I know there's probably a lot of advice
Yeah.
out there and that we could give on this particular topic, but if you are to think about your own journey,
Yeah.
what's one practical, actionable thing you'd say would be helpful for someone who's struggling with sexual impurity, and that's broad. And so maybe pick a context. It could be in terms of just mentally in regards to porn, or
Yeah.
just physically with sex outside of marriage and things like that. What's an actionable tip in any of those areas that you'd say maybe has been helpful for you and would be helpful for someone who's listening or watching this?
I would say make yourself accountable as much as you can. I remember someone in the church context who spoke with me saying how much they've been struggling with porn addiction over years, and it just opened up conversations that we became very healthy, and that led to him installing some software on his devices which would allow me to see what he's been looking at, and it just meant that level of accountability he chose to ask of me helped him in that journey to begin to find routes to greater level of freedom.
Yeah.
I actually do concur with that. Like that kind of like accountability, being able to, and you cannot open up with everyone, but if with the intention, God will bring the people in your, around you who you can actually be able to open up to, and the areas kind of like which you really kind of like struggle with. Because I know one thing about porn, like one thing leads to another. So even sometimes, like the more you feed yourself whatever the enemy is throwing our way, the more even like in our thought life, when we start kind of like interacting with human beings, etc., you start kind of like looking at people not really kind of like in the healthy way God created them, but just like those thoughts like you know, you can be a serial flat, you can starts becoming kind of like part of your reality. So if you can cut it at the root, I really can advise like anyone who's watching this kind of, it's really helpful. And just telling God, like, how did you create me? Give me the right thoughts so that I can be able just to be that man that's pleasing before you.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think for me it would be this verse that says, if we walk in the Spirit,
Yeah.
we will not fulfill the lust of the flesh.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, you experience a difficulty in stopping this thing that you feel is wrong. And sometimes, you try and it could easily lead to a state of hopelessness.
Yeah.
Something I found helpful is what are things you can begin to do in the opposite direction, that could begin to fill more and more of your time. So as opposed to maybe in your space setting the high goal of, I'm going to stop this cold turkey, and you've been trying that for long and you're getting hopeless, you say, okay, based on one of the things you've said, maybe I can plug into community, and be in a space where there are people who are seeking to move in this direction. And then how can I engage with God's word, or begin to change even the stuff I'm listening to?
Yeah.
How do I begin to shift my time investment to something that is moving me in the direction I want to go to?
Okay.
And in that space, relying on, I think, less on, let me not say less. I think there's a place where willpower plays,
Yeah.
but also allowing.
But will alone won't cut it.
It will not.
Yeah. I used to think I've got a strong will long ago, and I could push even things like maybe like even fasting, like 1 month, like. But immediately now, when you put like, okay, break, okay, now like I need to treat myself kind of like, even if it's food, now is when you discover like your will was just, waiting for that time, just like for you to know like it's not in charge. Yeah.
Yeah, I think many times we, in our relationship with God, we tend to assume that He is on this side and me on that side, and He's like, this is how you're meant to live, now do it. And He's going to mark you at the end on how well you have lived it out. But my strong belief is that God comes alongside us to walk that journey towards us. So there's the way He wants us to walk, and He says, okay, let's do this thing together. And so being able to lean into the various the steps, the nudges he's giving us, the things he's telling us to do in the moment, helps us get to that place, as opposed to putting the weight of I have to live this life based on my own strength and capability, and God will then reward me in the end. That mindset that God is working with me and leaning into what's a thing in the moment I can do that can help me move closer tends to be more helpful.
And on the back of that, to just involve God in the process. You know, often when we're struggling with these desires, we don't actually talk to God about them. Someone we like, let's involve God in that process. You know, see what His thoughts are. And when we're wrestling with temptation, just make prayer our first port of call rather than the last.
I think there's someone mentioned this about David in the Bible, and that when we look at the Psalms, how he was open to God about just his struggles and emotions in various areas, and just saying maybe he didn't talk to God about the area of his sexuality, or rather we don't see him express. He talks about his enemies and war, and he's so open about it. But in regards to being open, inviting God into that conversation, and like, okay, there's this lady, like Uriah's wife. Was that a thing that he brought to God, and that if it was, might have been an area he would have been able to receive direction and help from God. So I thought that was.
It's back to my point about grace. David is still called a man after God's own heart, even though his relationship with Bathsheba went badly wrong. So there's grace there.
Well, thank you, gents. Is there any parting shot or word any of you has before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I pray there's a sequel to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much, and God bless.